This is AM Agenda.
Hello and welcome to AM Agenda. I'm Ashley Gillen. We begin this week with another change to the political landscape after the CLP overwhelmingly won the weekend's Northern Territory election. Later in the program, we're going to be speaking with the incoming Chief Minister, Terry Mills. Aside from the Territory result, it's looking like a good start to the week for Labor, with the latest Nielsen poll showing we're now seeing an upward trend when it comes to the party's primary vote. It's nothing for the party to celebrate just yet at 32%, but for Julia Gillard, who's crept ahead of Tony Abbott as preferred Prime Minister in this poll, it's secured her some more breathing space when it comes to those pesky leadership rumblings. Plus, today, the issue the Coalition would rather not focus on, IR, is in the spotlight after the Financial Review reported that John Howard is pushing Mr Abbott to bring back individual employer contracts and more flexible unfair dismissal laws. Unsurprisingly, the Treasurer Wayne Swan has been quick to seize on the former Prime Minister's comments this morning, holding an early morning news conference in Canberra a short time ago.
I think you can bet your bottom dollar if Mr Howard, who was a Liberal Prime Minister for 12 years, is talking about bringing back work choices, then you can bet your bottom dollar that Mr Abbott is bringing back work choices.
Mr Swan, of course, has also asked for his analysis of the polls. This was his take on the Nielsen poll out today.
I think what we see is that the outcomes following the introduction of a price on carbon have put a wrecking ball through Tony Abbott's credibility.
Joining me this morning is the Labor MP, Kelvin Thomson, and the Liberal MP, Steve Chobo. Good morning to both of you. Looking at these polls, well, the Coalition still way in front on a two-party preferred basis on 54% compared to Labor's 48%. As I mentioned, Julia Gillard has just jumped ahead of Tony Abbott on the preferred Prime Minister rating for the first time in months this morning. Steve Chobo, are you worried Labor is starting to come back? This looks now like an upward trend over recent months.
Look, Ashley, anybody in the Coalition who's been in politics knows that the next election, when it comes, will be the only poll that matters. I mean, I know that there's a massive industry built around watching these polls and assessing these polls and all the nuances and whatnot. The reality is this, though. The Australian people at the next federal election will have finally, their referendum on the carbon tax. They'll finally have a chance to say, do we want this carbon tax or don't we want this carbon tax? Do we want to reward the Labor Party that's racked up $140 billion worth of debt, that's introduced something that's going to make the cost of living even more expensive, or do they want an alternative, someone that is Tony Abbott, who's got a plan for our future that doesn't involve a carbon tax, a pernicious tax, the world's biggest carbon tax, and one that was introduced without any electoral mandate whatsoever?
So, Steve, you don't think that the reason we're seeing Labor's primary boost getting a boost here is because the carbon tax has now kicked in and voters are saying, well, it's not as bad as I thought it might be?
Actually, what I'm saying to you is that polls will go up, polls will come down. None of us are going to get too excited about the results of a poll any one particular way or the other. What I'm focused on, and what I know that my colleagues are focused on, are being out there every day, prosecuting the arguments as to why we believe Labor's approach to managing Australia's economy is not in the long-term interests of our nation. It's not in our long-term interests because it's done a couple of things. It's driven up debt. This is a government that's also re-regulated the labour force very strongly. It's a government that's introduced as the centrepiece of its entire rationale bigger spending, bigger taxing government, and of course, you know, the banner headline across all of that is the introduction of this carbon tax, the world's biggest carbon tax, which they did without any mandate whatsoever, and that's why we say the next election will actually be a referendum on the carbon tax.
We'll get back to that labour force issue in a minute. Kelvin Thomson, what's your take on this? What do you think is behind this lift in support, and do you agree with the analysis that the boost we're seeing is giving Julia Gillard some breathing space from the leadership issues?
Well, I think there are several factors at work, Ashley, in the improvement in our polling. First, the fact is that the carbon price is now in effect, and the opposition had run a highly effective negative scare campaign against it, but in fact its impact on prices and impact on jobs has been exactly as we predicted. Australia continues to have low inflation and low unemployment. The sky has not fallen in. I think secondly, we're getting some support and recognition for acting to implement the recommendation of the Houston report in relation to asylum seekers. People have been very troubled about that issue and wanted us to take action against people smuggling and to stop the deaths at sea. So I think that there's some recognition of that. And thirdly, there appears to be some lift in our support in Queensland, where of course it has been very low, and people have seen Campbell Newman at work running amok, sacking people in Queensland, and so I think that there's some improvement in our level of support there.
We have seen that Galaxy poll today showing that Campbell Newman's dissatisfaction rating is now bigger than his satisfaction rating after that landslide win that Campbell Newman had just a few months ago. But Kelvin, when it comes to the leadership issue, and it is still something that's bumbling along despite Julia Gillard's best efforts, if this result was played out in an election, of course Labor would really still be wiped out. Is this sort of result still too low to put those leadership rumblings to rest?
Oh, well, I don't comment on the leadership speculation, Ashley. I think it only encourages that kind of thing, and frankly, that's not what we're on about. What we're on about is providing good government, low inflation, low unemployment, low interest rates, and pressing ahead with initiatives like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the National Broadband Network, and lifting superannuation for ordinary Australians.
Steve Jobo, let's move on and look at another issue. The Financial Review today reporting that the former Prime Minister John Howard is urging Tony Abbott to bring back individual employment contracts and also change unfair dismissal laws. Steve, I know you've said in the past that you'd like unfair dismissal laws to be relaxed. Why is there such a need for that?
Well, actually, it's quite straightforward. It's because that the single biggest generators of employment in our country, those that drive employment, those that drive giving people a chance, those that drive training and skills are, of course, Australia's small businesses. And small businesses across Australia are doing it really tough. This has been now 5-6 years of global economic tumult. It's been a period where a lot of small businesses are really struggling. And frankly, the last thing that they need is to be punished for making a poor employment decision where they get someone who turns out to be a bit of a bad egg, for example. That's the reason why I fervently believe that, and I hold myself out as being a very strong supporter and advocate for Australia's small business sector. So removing the monkey of regulation off their back is a key factor to getting them to be out there employing people and giving many young Australians the start in life that they look for when they leave school. So,
Steve, do you also agree with John Howard that we should see the reintroduction of individual employment agreements? And do you think there is a growing mood in the coalition and especially on the backbench for Tony Abbott to accept the sort of policies that you're talking about?
You know, Ashley, I think it's ridiculous that the treasurer of our country, Wayne Swan, goes out there and tries to once again drag up this tired old argument that everyone has had a gutful of, and it just shows what a broken old man Wayne Swan is when he starts to say, oh, this is all about work choices. I mean, get over yourself, Wayne. It's ridiculous. This isn't about work choices. This is about Labor's policy which says that an employer on the one hand and an employee on the other can't have an individual contract in place between the two of them. I mean, actually, seriously, what era are we living in? This isn't the coal mines of the early 1900s. We're talking about modern-day Australia. And for the Labor Party to say, no, it should be illegal. Employers and employees should not be allowed to have individual contracts. I mean, for goodness sake, but how absolutely ridiculous.
Steve Jobo, as far as we know anyway, because the coalition hasn't released its policy, that isn't coalition policy, the sorts of things you're advocating this morning.
Well, as I said, I'm putting forward my point of view, and I think it is absurd in modern-day Australia that we have the kinds of, well, I just think it's lunacy, actually, and the kind of complete lack of leadership by people like Wayne Swan to make out that there should be an illegal, it should actually be illegal for an employer and an employee to have an individual contract. It's just ridiculous.
But is it not also ridiculous if you're saying that Wayne Swan should look at those sort of options? Why wouldn't you be pushing for your own leader, Tony Abbott, to do the same thing?
Well, as I said, I hold this view. I mean, this is something that we'll be announcing in terms of our industrial relations policy in due course.
Wait a minute, sorry, you're saying the coalition will be announcing that you'll be reintroducing
I'm saying we'll be announcing our industrial relations policy
but
in due course.
But you don't think it's
going
to include individual employment contracts?
I'm not going to speculate, Ashley.
Changes to unfair dismissal laws?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to speculate. I mean, I'm going to push very strongly for the things. Well, I'm going to push very strongly for the things that I believe in. That's part of my role as a member of the coalition. It's part of what I'm going to be doing. But more importantly, Ashley, I think and I understand your interest in what the coalition's policies are going to be. And of course, Australians want to know what the alternative is. And we'll put that out there. But let's not lose sight of an important factor, and I think even more important than that, Ashley, which is that the current government, the government that lays down the law of this country, has said that it is illegal for an employer and an employee to have a contract. And what's more, we have this dishonest campaign by tired old broken men like Wayne Swan, who try to make out that in fact it should remain illegal for an employer and an employee to have an individual contract in Australia in this century. I mean, it's absurd, and it puts us behind the rest of the world when it comes to labour market flexibility and providing the greatest opportunity for our country to have a stronger, richer, more prosperous future.
Kelvin Thomson, why can't we have a debate in this country about IR without Labor bringing up this scare campaign to do with work choices? Tony Abbott said work choices dead and buried. Any changes that he's going to make are going to be within the constraints of the Fair Work laws that Labor has set up. The coalition isn't going to reintroduce work choices, is it? We know how politically poisonous it is, so why does Labor continue to go down that path?
Well, I'm happy for us to have a debate about it, Ashley, and I welcome the fact that Steve Ciobo and John Howard, I welcome their candour in supporting individual employment contracts, but I certainly do not. The Labor Party does not, and we believe this is simply a recipe for a tax on penalty rates, on overtime, and a recipe for allowing bosses to sack workers without a genuine reason. So we strongly support fairness in the workplace, workers' rights, and we are very much against the introduction of individual employment contracts. So by all means, let's have the debate. But I think a lot of Australian workers would be very concerned to hear Liberal and National Party figures talking, as they regularly do, about the idea of changing the laws that are presently in place, changing the protections for workers that are presently in place, and reintroducing laws that make it easier for employers to sack people.
But Kelvin, when it comes to especially the unfair dismissal laws for small businesses, small business has been crying out in this country for Labor to reassess, swinging this back slightly to the way that we saw under John Howard's era, saying that it's really just such a tough position that small business owners are in at the moment when it comes to those laws. We've heard big business arguing that the Fair Work laws have gone too far. When it comes to the small businesses, though, and those unfair dismissal laws, why not look at making them a bit more flexible?
Because the economy has been performing better under the arrangements that we have introduced. We have lower unemployment than we had during the period of the Howard government. We have less in the way of industrial disputation than we had during the period of the Howard government. We have inflation under control. We have interest rates much less than they were during the Howard government's period in office. So there is no valid basis for introducing laws which would make it easier for employers to sack people.
Steve Ciobo, can I just ask you the question again that I asked you earlier? Is there a mood in the coalition for Tony Abbott to re-embrace the sort of policies that you and John Howard have been backing today? Is this something that really is putting Tony Abbott under pressure within the party or not?
There's a mood and a recognition that what we need to do is undo a lot of the damage to Australia's industrial relations framework that Labor's put in place, and to the extent that coalition policy will undo that damage, then yes, of course, we're absolutely committed to making sure that we undo the damage that Labor's done. Because, you see, actually, what Kelvin's neglecting to say, and I mean, I hear this notion about, Labor doesn't want to make it easier for people to be fired. Well, you know what? I don't know any employer with a good employee that just randomly fires people. It's not what happens. But what actually does happen under Labor's laws now, Ashley, and take, for example, there's a cafe just down the road from my electorate office. They used to be open 6 days a week. Labor introduces penalty rates and these tougher strictures on employment and says, we're doing it because it's in the best interest of the workers. Well, guess what, Ashley? That sandwich bar now is only open 5 days a week. So the employees who work there have one less job, one less period of rostering onto their payroll, where they no longer have employment on that 6 days. So this underscores why there's a problem.
Steve Ciobo, sounds like that's an argument you should be putting to your own leader, Tony Abbott. Thank you for your time, Steve. I just do want to move on to Kelvin and just get your take on the NT election. We're going to be getting the CLP's view very shortly. Do you think, Kelvin, that the carbon tax and Julia Gillard's unpopularity fed in to the NT election result?
There's no evidence for that, Ashley. There appear to have been quite different results from electorate to electorate within the Northern Territory itself. So obviously we'll be analysing the factors that were at work there. But my first observation is that we've been in government there for 11 years. That's difficult to seek re-election in those circumstances. You saw that was the same life as the Howard government had. It was the same life as Labor had in Victoria. So if you're in a situation where there's substantial population growth, you see pressures on infrastructure, pressures on cost of living, pressures on planning issues, which tend to make it difficult for governments to achieve re-election. It seems to me that this issue of local government amalgamations in the Northern Territory was a factor, and that there was some resentment in the remote communities about that. But we'll be examining the factors that have been at work here and obviously drawing conclusions from that.
Yeah, look, some soul searching for the Labor Party in the NT after the Bush made their views very clear on the weekend. Coming up after the break, we're going to be speaking with the incoming CLP Chief Minister, Terry Mills. That's next, Kelvin. Thank you for your time. We'll be back after this break.